Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to this session of the Great Books, which is one of my favorite courses at Ubiquity University and the Wisdom School, where month by month, we have a graduate seminar on some of the great books of the literary tradition of humankind. Over the years, we've developed courses in most of the great books, East and West, North and South, ancient and modern. And we are very pleased today to be able to bring one of the scholars we've gotten to know through Humanity Rising and also Ubiquity University, Maryam, Sayyad, who's going to be offering a discourse this month and next month on the Golden Ass by Apuleius, one of the most extraordinary tales coming out of Roman antiquity several thousand years ago. So Maryam, I want to welcome you. As per our custom, Maryam will make a presentation for 45, 50 minutes, and then we'll open it up to dialogue for the balance of the time. Thank you, Maryam. I turn the program over to you.
Well, hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Jim. Good morning to you. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I'm just going to get right into it after that introduction by Jim Garrison, our friend. I'm going to begin by contextualizing the Golden Ass, going over some biographical info about Apuleius and sharing some of the philosophical and religious influences that were on him and around him. Now, this includes the cult of Isis, which if you've read the book, and I believe you've read the book, the cult of Isis is obviously of some importance to the author. But as we delve into the cult of Isis, we'll be spirited away to Egypt and into Egypt's kind of obsession with the soul and eternal life. I confess that this is one of my favorite subjects and probably the main reason that I chose the Golden Ass when I was invited to speak on a great book, to choose and speak about a great book. You know, it's a good opportunity because unlike the Greek and Roman, the Egyptian material is not very accessible. It takes a lot of digging, so to speak. The mythology is actually known to us primarily through their funereal tradition, what is called their funereal tradition, and it's comprised of the pyramid texts of the Old Kingdom, the coffin texts of the Middle Kingdom, and the papyri of the New Kingdom. So what we get of mythology from Egypt is really through their relationship to the soul and the afterlife and just their belief in the immortality of the soul. This is how the characters are preserved and passed down to us. Now, they're also preserved in ritual. Ritual is a wonderful way to preserve knowledge. And so that's what we get in the Golden Ass. And Egyptologists, as far as I've seen, as far as I've read, they tend to respect the way that Apuleius handles the cult of Isis and sort of the initiation ritual in there. They say that it corroborates with the dynastic information. And considering that these were kept secret for so long, it's really it's a jewel for those of us who are interested in the mysteries and initiation practices, but really primarily the mysteries, because it divulges quite a lot, and it's the only one, actually. It's the only description of initiation into the cult of Isis that we have. Period. Now, this funereal tradition, this Egyptian tradition, it goes back to at least 2500 BCE, at least to the pyramids. And this narrative around the rise of the soul, it remained consistent for at least 1,000 years through the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, and New Kingdom. And this is really something. It stayed consistent and kind of above ground. And then it went underground. We don't hear much from it until it reemerges again in the Hellenistic era and into the Roman era, into the Golden Ass, where it is still unchanged. So this is very interesting. And this is according to Egyptologists, really incredible. So as noted in the class synopsis, the novel continues to remain sort of this fascination for scholars of myth and the mysteries, really primarily for two reasons. One of them is this chapter 11, this kind of laying out of the initiation to the cult of Isis. And it's chapter 11 in the sense that it tells us much about the mysteries, but there's also a very important mythological element in here. It really, in addition to providing the only complete description of initiation of the cult of Isis, it is also the only complete description we have from the ancient world of sort of a unitary goddess. What do I mean? So let me present my general approach to this notion of a unitary goddess, what we call the goddess or the great goddess or the mother. As you know, the 20th century has seen a surge of interest and growing certainty about the presence of this figure, presence of kind of goddess monotheism in the distant past. But there's also been quite a lot of skeptical backlash towards this idea, even from feminist authors, feminist religion scholars. One of them is Cynthia Eller. In the Myth of Matriarchal Prehistory, she writes, goddess monotheism has not been documented any place on the globe. Historical religions from classical antiquity to the present day are home to many different goddesses if they include female deities at all. In classical Greece, for example, the various goddesses had diverse roles and functions. The Greeks did not regard them as aspects of a unitary goddess. So in essence, she argues that the notion of goddess monotheism is a fiction unsupported by ethnographic and historic facts. And she provides pretty compelling evidence and argument. But I want to argue that it is supported by mythological facts. Although he's not a Greek, it is a fact that Apuleius describes his queen Isis as a single godhead. He says she's a single godhead representing all the gods and goddesses in one shape, which means that goddesses and gods are all precisely aspects of this unitary goddess. And it could be countered that Apuleius was alone in describing Isis in these terms, but this is quite unlikely, considering that the cult of Isis was as popular as it was. It was one of the most popular cults of the Roman period. Now, there are many reasons. We all have our reasons why we're interested in the notion of a unitary goddess. One of my personal reasons is that this figure seems to be always associated with the mysteries, and therefore with matters of the soul. Which brings us to the other reason, sometimes the main reason why myth scholars continue to read the Golden Ass, continue to read and discuss it and write about it. And that is its embedded tale of Cupid and Psyche, or Eros and Psyche. I tend to prefer Eros to Cupid, because it too is an initiation story, and it's about the psyche, which is a Greek word that means both soul and butterfly. But it also means psyche. And so the tale is both religious and it's psychological. And depth psychologists have really worked extensively with this myth. But we're going to talk about that next time. It's a little bit different from the cult of Isis initiation because it is about the psyche. And therefore, it sort of gives you this sense that this initiations or these radical transformations of consciousness are made available to us naturally in the course of life, and in particular in relationship to love, that love somehow tortures the soul into initiation. But again, we're going to talk about that next time, because we have our hands full with Isis and the goddess and Egypt. Yeah. So at this point, I just want to throw out some suggestive ideas and themes to get us thinking in the language of metaphor before moving on to sort of this reality of life and times of Apuleius. I want to bring up this idea, this duality of magic and prayer. In book 2, Lucius calls himself an eager student of the remarkable and miraculous. I think most of us can relate. And this must be an important theme, because Apuleius, the book ends his novel with the remarkable and miraculous, doesn't he? It's here at the beginning and it's here at the end, but it's changed. From book 1 onward, magic comes by way of spells. And let's also face it, there's quite a lot of misogyny shoved in there into a tale that ultimately gives us the great goddess. There's a lot of misogyny, particularly associated with witchcraft and sexuality. And we can talk about that. Now, so it begins with magic, and magic is kind of under this spell notion. But in the last chapter, Lucius doesn't cast a spell for magic in order for magic to happen to him. He prays. He prays for magical aid. So just kind of want to throw out this distinction between magic and prayers, or what's the difference? So like, I think it's a good question to kind of keep in mind. Now, another book-ending motif of the novel is Lucius's white horse. I didn't even notice this the first few times I read this book. Even when I was writing about it in my dissertation, it didn't even come up for me. I just noticed it this last time when I read it. Maybe some of you did too, which is why I really love sharing, because we're all noticing different things. So in the discussion, please share. Anyway, Lucius comes in on a white horse at the beginning. Then he loses his horse when he turns into an ass and gets it back after his initiation. So he rides in on a white horse. It's taken the image. What is this? What archetype is this protagonist embodying or trying to embody? Who is Lucius? Or who is he ideally as a young man just leaving the nest and heading out into the world on his white horse? Who is it that usually comes in on a white horse? So what comes up for me immediately is this idea of sort of this knight in shining armor on his white horse. Now we're way before the Arthurian tradition, but this is an archetypal image. To me, it signals this heroism. It's a hero that rides in on a white horse. And there's purity in this too. The horse is white. Get this notion of a being in the saddle, of being the driver, but also being kind of above and superior to this animal. So it's this theme of being master, being one in charge, being a navigator. In any event, there are two figures. There's a rider and a graceful, beautiful horse. White horses are always emblematic of beauty and femininity. I read somewhere that it's usually female heroes. It's the heroine, it's female figures that ride white horses. So there's another thing to just kind of have in the back of our minds. And what about this ass? So the guy riding on the white horse, coming in with this heroic kind of vibe, he's the one that turns into an ass. It's not even a horse, but an ass. So unlike the rider on a white horse, the ass is not in charge. He's a servant, he's a slave, he has to be led, ridden, dragged. The ass doesn't charge in heroically like a horse, unless the story is about a spiritual sort of heroism. Let's talk about that. just like the rider on the white horse, the ass too is implicated in a savior story that we know very well. Jesus rides in on a donkey. Mary rides a donkey. And in fact, when Lucius saves Charité's life and carries her into town on his back, the narrator comments on the virgin bride on the donkey back. So this tells us a couple of things, including that the Christian myth was known to Apuleius, so the Christian sort of mythic motifs. We're going to talk about this more when we get into Egypt, but really the point here is more the ass in Egypt, which may have influenced the Christian figure to some point. So there must be some kind of convergence there. But we'll get into the myth of Isis and Osiris later, but for those of you who are familiar with it, the figure of Seth or Typhon, he's the one who tears Osiris apart, dismembers him, and then Isis has to piece him back together. So Isis has to then come in and rescue him. Seth's animal form is that of the ass. And the Book of the Dead, Thoth tells Osiris in the underworld to ride Seth, that this is the right way. When Seth rides Osiris, things fall apart, disorder reigns. And there's a theologian, I believe is a theologian or scholar in any way, named Merkelbach, and he has written of this story. He's written, to live the life of an ass is to endure a life without Isis. So let's keep that in mind too as we go forward. So the ass, let's kind of wrap it up and say, so the ass is sort of this, not the spiritual component, not the master, but in a way is part of it because it carries this component on its back. It does it humbly, it does it obediently. It participates in this savior principle, not by its activity, but by its passivity and malleability. So in the case of the golden ass, the ass is not at all master of his life and needs to be liberated from bondage, correct? So here we have kind of the shape of the plot. It's about this transformation from human to animal and animal to human, but also from a hero to the one in need of a hero, back to hero. Hero in need of saving, back to hero, right? Or more closely, somebody who aspires to be a hero, then needing a hero himself, to then becoming a hero. It's subtle, but Lucius does have a touch of the hero. Again, just throwing these out there to just let some themes simmer as we get into some of the contexts. You know, we have magic, we have prayer, the soul, the body, heroism, salvation. We have humans. What are animals? We have the feminine principle and the mysteries to kind of start us imagining as to what is going on in Apuleius's mind. Okay, now let's begin talking about Apuleius's biography and then get into some of the philosophical history in this time, philosophical influences around him. He was born in 124, the Common Era, in Algeria. He's a Roman who lived in Algeria. He was a brilliant lawyer. He wrote on philosophy, natural science, poetry, novels, drama. His only love poems that are preserved are homoerotic. The Golden Ass itself was probably written in 170, the Common Era, when he was about 46 years old. Later, Apuleius held posts in the Roman religious administration. He was a priest of Asclepius. Christianity was known to him, so when he does talk about the ass, we can be sure that he knows about the Christian idea. But it was known to him as kind of just one of these queer sects that was around. There were many variations of these sects in the Roman Empire. Now, in the history of Christianity at this point, St. Paul's epistles had already been written. Apuleius went to school in Carthage and then to Athens, where he studied philosophy and rhetoric and became one of Plutarch's adherents. He, at this time, endeavored to obtain admission to as many sort of initiatic mystery cults as possible with his family background. And he seemed to have been able to get introductions into most of them. He was probably initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries, and at some point he traveled to Asia Minor in search of other mystery cults, which we assume were the Mithraic ones. We don't know what happened there. So one kind of interesting biographical fact is that Apuleius married a rich widow who was 20 years older than himself. You know, this is not so important, but her family accused him of using witchcraft to gain her affections. Now, come to find out in the Roman Empire, magic was actually illegal and entailed capital punishment. So Apuleius was in real danger because sort of everyone knew that he was steeped in magic. Like, he had that curiosity that Lucius has about parapsychological phenomena and magic in general. Anyway, luckily Apuleius he wasn't punished because he proved that even before this accusation had been laid against him, he had already made arrangements for all of his wife's fortune to go to her children. So he was able to prove himself innocent. Now, about the novel's background, The Golden Ass was written about 5 years after an author by the name of Lucien wrote a story called Lucius or the Ass, a tale that was itself inspired by another one before it. So this kind of motif of a person who turns into an ass was already a literary device. And so Apuleius uses this man-turned-ass motif to say something else, to say what he wants to convey. The difference between Apuleius and those others is that he included the cult of Isis initiation at the end and the tale of Cupid and Psyche. So there's sort of a reason why these two stand out as the important factors, elements of this book. The previous Lucius and the Ass, that ends on another sort of sexual joke. But Lucius's ass is initiated into the cult of Isis and Osiris. Well, so I said that this is why we still read the book, is because of this. But the reason that we even still have this book is because of the sexual material. This is really interesting to me, is that the reason that this book survived in its complete form, because none of his other works survived so completely, is that the monks liked reading it because of its somewhat pornographic material. So it was read and scribed over and over and over again, so that, sort of like this pornographic preserved the mythical and mystical for us. It's interesting. Now I want to talk about some of the philosophy that was around at the time, because I think it really informs the material. When we're talking about the Roman era, this 2nd century AD, but the sort of this current of Greek philosophy and myth that came into the Roman, it first was sort of transmutated in the Hellenistic era. And so it's good for us to take a look at some of the philosophy of the Hellenistic period, because Greek culture, it spread everywhere. But first it stopped in Alexandria. And Alexandria, as the seat of Hellenistic culture, was a very sort of academic, literary, flourishing town. So Plato and Aristotle flourished at this time, but there were other popular schools of thought and philosophies emerging at the same time. And these, according to, so I I got most of my information about this period from Richard Tarnas in his Passion of the Western Mind. And he speaks about how the philosophical trend of the Hellenistic era was mostly ethical. It was more about how to live life rather than think about the truths of the universe. And if they were about the truths of the universe, the prime concern was sort of like, well, what does it have to do with me? So he says that the characteristic impulse of the Hellenistic schools was less a passion to comprehend the world in its mystery and magnitude, more about devising a belief system by which to live, to cope, to find inner peace, sort of a set of moral principles backed by a cosmology to support it. And so philosophy took on this more dogmatic, prescriptive approach, prescribing to people what they should do and shouldn't do. The results, he says, was that philosophy became more fatalistic, and B, it prompted disengagement from the world and from one's unruly emotions and desires. So do you hear the tone of like this Asian philosophy tone in here? Because while Hellenic philosophy, say in the case of Plato and Aristotle, it did contain this this mastering of unruly emotions and desires, but it really wasn't about disengagement in any way. So here we have this kind of fatalism and this disengagement and ruling over the emotions, but the goal, as it was in Hellenic era, the goal of philosophy was still happiness, how to find happiness. So one of the, in addition to Plato and Aristotle, one of the popular philosophies of the time was Stoicism, found around the 3rd century BCE by Zeno of Citium. And now, with Stoicism, there are some basic principles to keep in mind. One is that logos orders all of reality. Secondly, that man's happiness comes from turning to this logos and adjusting, did I say man? But there's a reason for it, because actually philosophy, those are the terms it uses, and that's for good reason, but I shouldn't do that. That people can achieve true happiness by turning to logos and sort of adjusting ourselves to and our lives according to the logos. To be free, therefore, is to be in tune with God's will, or the will of the logos. What matters most is the state of the soul, not outside circumstances. And that's why the Stoic's character is this sort of, when you think somebody's Stoic, it means they're sort of serene, self-contained, self-disciplined, dutiful, both to the universe and to the human community, and remaining, sort of unmoved by external events. You can kind of see some hints of this in the initiation story at the end and the person that he becomes. The Stoics were still in keeping with this kind of Socratic ideal of moral virtue and excellence. And again, most importantly to it is that they maintained this belief in divine order. On the other hand, we have the Epicureans. Epicureanism is not so concerned about moral virtue or logos. It asserts that life is best lived in pursuit of pleasure. Hedonism, hedon means pleasure. And we get this a little bit in, not a little bit, we get this a lot in sort of the crises that befall Lucius. Pleasure, according to Epicureans, is defined as freedom from pain and fear. And what we fear most is death and retribution from the gods in the afterlife. So first and foremost, we must rid ourselves of a belief in gods. Gods are not to be feared because they're not paying attention to the human world. So it's ridding ourselves of belief in anthropomorphic gods, personal gods. We don't have to fear death either, because death doesn't hurt. We won't be conscious of pain or sadness because we won't be conscious anymore. Hence, happiness is best achieved by withdrawing from the world and creating a simple, pleasurable life among the people. So now, what is the cosmology? Remember we said that there was a cosmology that supported these ethical notions. The cosmology that supports the Epicurean view is atomism, because an atomism doesn't recognize a purpose or a design. There's kind of no point. So therefore, let's just enjoy. In addition to this Stoicism and Epicureanism, we have a very extreme form of skepticism that emerges that kind of just sort of asserts that nothing is certain, and not even that. You know, the basic kind of principle here is that truth cannot be known. Well, now, what happens to reality in these philosophical systems? So reality is either deterministic, according to the Stoics. Reality is irrelevant to human life, according to Epicureans. And according to the skeptics, it's just simply beyond human cognition. Now, we never seem to be quite satisfied with just philosophy, and people there at that time weren't either. In fact, the Hellenistic era there in Alexandria was just it was an entire world of possibility when it came to mystery religions. And so this spiritual hunger that most fulfilled people was found in the mystery religions. So for deeper meaning outside of philosophy, that particular communion between intellect and feeling, or what we call embodiment, that comes with really gleaning the big picture, people turn to mystery schools. Whether they were Greek, Egyptian, Mithraic, Dionysian, the cult of Serapis, Isis, Eleusis, everything was there in Alexandria. And I just kind of want to point out that yes, sort of mystery religions fulfill this longing, but it was no accident that they were cropping up, in Alexandria, because here they are in Egypt, and they are surrounded by this, you know, thousands of years of real, not just belief, but a lot of work committed to the notion of the immortal soul and the possibility of redemption in that way. Now, not everyone is involved in mystery religions. Not everyone is being initiated. In fact, apparently we're told that a very small part of the population was initiated. The completely non-religious adhere to some kind of nihilistic or rational philosophy. The religious turn to mystery religions, but a small portion of them. Most religious people, the religious interests of the majority, were sort of at the level of magic, of superstition, of astrology, soothsaying, palmistry, and no doubt shamanic rituals. And what I want to do now is kind of go a little bit further into this determinism. Why? Because as you've noticed, one of the running themes of the golden ass is fortune, it's fate. So here we are talking about this period of deterministic ideas in this time. And one of the big reasons, one of the ways that this determinism expressed itself was through astrology. Let's keep in mind that sort of this Ptolemaic astronomical geocentric view was created in the 2nd century. So Apuleius actually predates Ptolemy, but we're aware that there was a lot of talk about astronomy and astrology in this period. So what we have is this astronomical view, this astronomical view with this Earth as the center, and then the planets kind of radiating around the Earth, with Saturn being the last one. Saturn. This is really important. So this is the astronomical view, and the astrology that comes with it is, you know, as we know, it has it kind of matches mythological figures with the planets, and then on to destiny and character, etc. Now, because as I said, this kind of demand for predictive power was at an all-time high. Astrology was well funded, and therefore it kind of was studied and expanded. And with the expansion of this astrological perspective came a growing belief that human life was ruled by destiny, and not just destiny, but knowable destiny, because we're not just talking about the universe being intelligent, but it is also intelligible. Therefore, astrology kind of cut across science and philosophy and religion and was the unifying outlook of the age. So astrology, determinism. Now, what did those different philosophical schools think about astrology? How did they place themselves vis-a-vis determinism? Well, to the Stoics, astrology represents the fundamental kind of determinism of human life. It is the best method for interpreting cosmic will and aligning one's life with the logos. Now, we're not going to talk about the Epicureans and skeptics, because remember, the universe is not ordered, and it's certainly not ordered in a way that we can know it. So they weren't determinists at all. Platonists, on the other hand, believed that the planets are ultimately under the governance of the supreme good. They determine our fate, but not for, so they determine fate, but not for the evolved individual. The planets influence bodily nature, but we can control our passions and achieve freedom from astrological determinism. The wise rule their stars. So for the Platonists, yes, there is determinism, but our task is to not be determined, it is to be free. Mystery religions, likewise. The mystery religions, if they can be said to have all the same belief, considered that the planet Saturn is sort of where this realm of limitation, fate, death, the realm of time kind of comes to an end, and beyond Saturn is a realm of the eternal sphere. And there is this a way that we can be lifted up out of this fated existence and connect with this realm of eternal freedom. Another great philosophical school of this time was Neoplatonism, which bridged the gap between rationalist philosophy and mystery religion. Apuleius actually explicitly considered himself a Neoplatonist. If you remember in the story, his foster mother claims that Lucius's mother was related to Plutarch. And Plutarch was was famed for being a Neoplatonic philosopher. So this is a legend that Apuleius kind of allowed to exist, but then later he confessed that this relationship did not exist, that he was just an adherent and an admirer of Plutarch and the Neoplatonic school. What is important of the Neoplatonic school for Apuleius in particular, or what he really latched onto and wrote about, was its theory of the soul. So Plutarch wrote a treatise called De Genius Socrates. Apuleius wrote De Deo Socrates. If you remember, Socrates kind of has this daemon that doesn't so much tell him what to do, but prevents him from doing certain things. So this is what Plutarch and Apuleius were talking about. But it leads into Apuleius' theory of the soul that then informs his book. Here's how it goes. He says that gods and humans don't connect because the gods don't really concern themselves in any emotional way with human affairs. So this intermediary traffic between people and gods is affected by the daemons. These are the messengers to and fro. Now, these daemons could be influenced using either magic or prayer. Remember, considering the difference between these. Now, each individual has his or her own specific daemon. Apuleius translates this word as genius. Daemon is genius. Genie, when my part of the world, we call them jinn. In the Jungian analysis, it is called the preconscious self, or the greater inner self. The genius made one genialis, sparkling with spirit and life. Hesiod's Aphrodite is genial, which means smile-loving, but is also associated with genital, and makes a man or woman sexually potent, which can also mean capable of functioning, spiritually fertile. So all the things related to vitality, good mood, being happy, happily alive, creative, etc., these come from the daemon. According to Apuleius, one should cultivate one's genius or daemon by leading the right kind of life morally and religiously. And if one does, after death, this daemon becomes a positive figure, becomes a lar, rather than a larva, which is a ghost or an evil spirit. So one's conduct in life will outcome its quality after death. The Jungian analyst and scholar Mary-Louise von Franz tells us at the end of the story, the daemon or symbol of the self is Osiris. And before that, it is Eros. As I said, today we're going to stay on Osiris and his relationship to the golden ass. And then get to the Egyptian tradition so that we can get to know what Osiris, who Osiris is, who Isis is, who Seth is, that Apuleius is conveying to us. All right, so let's get into Osiris now. Osiris is essentially the immortal soul. When we look at the Egyptian funereal texts, and we have usually these kings who are going through their journey in the afterworld, what they are doing is they're taking these steps that will bring them before Osiris. And once they're before Osiris, they find out that they are Osiris. And so then after that, the king no longer is called the king, but is called Osiris. So what we have is this notion of the soul coming into this judgment period, afterlife, and justifying its right to immortality, justifying its identity with Osiris. So we can just go ahead and understand Osiris as that, as the immortal soul. So the question then is, who is Isis? I think that Apuleius and I would agree that Isis is not just a goddess, but she is the goddess. She is the feminine principle of the universe, or at least that is what she becomes slowly through the Egyptian period as she takes on more characteristics of the other goddesses, of Hathor, of Nut, of Ma'at. And by the time that she's in the Hellenistic era and the Roman era where Apuleius is, Isis is pretty much the goddess, the one goddess, the all-mother, the mother of the universe. And so she begins her speech, remember, with I, mother of the universe. Okay, so this association of Apuleius with Plutarch, it isn't just about being a Neoplatonist. Plutarch also gives us the most complete rendition, most complete account of the myth of Isis and Osiris. So the myth that we know as the myth of Isis and Osiris today, we get from Plutarch. Many scholars say that Plutarch kind of wrote this myth in this way in order to justify his philosophical agenda, and his philosophical agenda was kind of to promote the rightness of Plato's theory of soul, Plato's view of the soul. But we won't get into Plato's view of the soul right now. Let's get into Plutarch's telling of myth of Isis and Osiris. So just sit back and let's take this in. First, Plutarch gives us a genealogy of the characters. He says that Rhea gave birth to 5 children over 5 days. Osiris, elder Horus, Typhon or Seth, Isis, and Nephthys. Osiris and elder Horus were fathered by Helios. Isis was fathered by Hermes or Thoth, and Typhon and Nephthys were both fathered by Cronus or Time. He also tells us that Isis and Osiris were united in the womb. And some even say that elder Horus was born from their union. So Isis and Osiris were united in the tomb, and Typhon and Nephthys at some point get married. Just want to say that sometimes I'm going to say Typhon, sometimes Seth, but Plutarch is speaking, he uses the term Typhon, which is the Greek name for Seth, and very, very definitely connected with the donkey. The Typhon is often in a donkey form, ass form. Anyway, Plutarch continues. When Osiris was born, a voice cried out that the Lord of all was coming to the light of day, and another that the great king and benefactor Osiris had been born. Osiris liberated the Egyptians from their, quote, primitive and brutish manner of life. He showed them how to grow crops, established laws, and taught them to worship the gods. Later, he traveled and civilized the rest of the world, winning over most of the peoples by beguiling them with persuasive speech together with all manner of song and poetry. So kind of recognize that Osiris as this king, as the good king, is a civilizing force. Now, when Osiris was away, he was safe from Typhon's plots to overthrow him, given that Isis kept a close watch over tricky Typhon. But on the 28th year of Osiris's life, or 28th year of his reign, Plutarch isn't sure, Typhon succeeds in overthrowing him. Together with 72 conspirators, Typhon fits a beautiful chest to the exact measurements of his brother's body, then playfully tricks him into laying down in it. The conspirators secure the lid with molten lead and release it into the river. When Isis hears of this, she cuts off one of her locks of hair, puts on mourning clothes, and goes in search of Osiris, accosting and questioning each person she encounters until she finds some children who knew where the chest had been thrown into the river. Isis next learns that Osiris had been intimate with Nephthys while mistaking her for Isis, and that their union had produced a child. Nephthys had exposed this child immediately in fear of Typhon. Isis finds the boy with the help of her dogs and raises him to become her attendant. He is Anubis, who keeps watch over gods as dogs do over men. With his help and the divine breath of rumor, Isis learns that the chest had drifted ashore in Byblos and a heath tree had grown up around it. The tree was then cut down and made into a pillar that now supports the roof of the local king. Osiris is entombed in this pillar. So Isis goes to Byblos. One thing leads to another. She gets herself to the house of the king and becomes the nursemaid of the queen's child. Every night in secret, Isis burns the mortal parts of the child's body while she herself turns into a swallow and flies around the Osiris pillar. One night, the queen witnesses these events and gets scared, so she snatches the child from Isis. And remember, Isis is already very emotional, so she loses her cool and reveals her identity and immediately demands the pillar then and there. She takes the chest into her possession and sets sail for her son's land. She finally, in the boat, opens the chest, embraces Osiris, and weeps. She takes him to the son's home, and Typhon finds out. He comes back for Osiris, and this time he takes no chances. He cuts him into 14 pieces and scatters his pieces around Egypt. This is the tale that we all know, the dismemberment tale, casting the phallus into the river. Isis takes up her search once again and succeeds in piecing together all of Osiris, all except for his phallus. This she replaces with a, quote, likeness. Now, Plutarch doesn't relay this part of the story, but other authors say that Isis teaches Horus the magical words that will revive Osiris. And Isis herself receives these magical words from Thoth. So we have this image of sort of this feminine figure who whispers secrets into the ear, and Horus just now knows what to do. back to Plutarch. Horus is ready to avenge his parents, so when Osiris wakes up, he starts training Horus for battle with Typhon. Horus goes into battle, defeats his uncle, binds him in ropes, and brings him before Isis. Here he is, mother. And Isis sets him free. Horus gets enraged that Isis has let the enemy go. So she tears the crown off her head, but her father Thoth immediately replaces it with the headdress of cow horns. We often see images of Isis with the cow horns that belong to Hathor. Afterwards, Typhon is defeated 3 more times, once in court and twice in battle. I just want to say a little bit, or just throw a lot of information at you about this, the Egyptian sort of narrative of the rising soul, and then let's have a talk. Now, I said that the narrative doesn't change over the 1,000 years from Old Kingdom to New. It doesn't fundamentally change, but it does go through some changes. The biggest one being that somewhere in the Middle Kingdom, the post-mortem event takes place in the underworld. In the Old Kingdom, the soul would sort of ascend upward toward Mother Sky, towards Nut, who's always eager to receive her child back into her arms. But it all takes place in the sky, up there. In the Middle and New Kingdoms, the narrative changes. And but it continues to kind of feature this important masculine and feminine in the narrative. And here's what the masculine and feminine narrative is. So in the Old Kingdom, Mother Sky called the soul up from the mortal realm and into union with her in the eternal realm of the stars, which is where the mortal soul had originally come from anyway. So it's like a return into Mother's arms, and it's a union. Now the New Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom and the New Kingdom narrative, it kind of echoes this theme of post-mortem union, but the journey there now takes place in the underworld. And this is where we get that story of the sun descending into the underworld, uniting with the body of the underworld god, who is Osiris, and raising him. But notice that once again, the risen soul is a united pair. Egyptologist Eric Horning tells us that the Litany of Re, which is a hymn, calls this dual being the united one. And the Dynasty 21 papyrus links it with the pair of arms that keep the sun perpetually moving through both the sky and the underworld. And once again, this union involves masculine and feminine because that pair of arms belongs to a woman. And in fact, this the underworld for the Egyptians is considered masculine. This place of transformation is considered masculine, while this sort of this teleological force that's drawing it to the eternal realm is feminine. So Horning explains, the upper force often has the female attribute of a pair of breasts. Besides suggesting the goddess Nut, this attribute refers to the goddess of the west and to Hathor, whose arms extend toward the sun god from the western mountains. So beautiful. In contrast, the power of the depths, regardless of whether it appears as darkness, primordial water, earth, or Osiris, has no maternal protective character. Rather, it is a creative, transforming power. So the soul is recalled to its immortal status and its original home in the eternal realm. The soul is considered as a thing in transformation. Remember, the psyche is butterfly. The soul is a thing in transformation. It is in constant transition and transmutation. It transitions from this world into the next. Some consider it a transformation from one state of being to another state of being. Some consider it as a transformation from matter into light. One account has it that when the spirit body unites with the spirit soul, the physical body must transform into spiritual substance. So one speaks of matter transforming to spirit, another of matter transforming into light. Anyway, the change is from one state to another. And the process can be rendered as a transformation or as a transmutation. So I say this, and I'm repeating it so much because just one of the key themes, obviously, in the Golden Ass is this transformation, things transforming from one state to another, often from human to animal, which is, perhaps, at least in Apuleius's mind, is a transformation into a lower being rather than a higher being. Anyway, so the feminine is the thing that draws the soul towards its transmutation. So it's portrayed by breasts or outstretched arms. The feminine is in this way the receptive, nurturing, supportive, protective, and above all, desirous of union with the soul. She loves the soul unequivocally and longs for its return, which also means she longs for the soul to transmute. If it is allowed that in Egypt, as in Platonic philosophy, the soul's mission is to remember its divinity, its immortality, and its place of origin, then remembrance is what the feminine desires. And so this figure of Isis in this initiation, it's like she's that force that's just guiding Lucius to just remember himself. And Lucius just wants to become himself again, correct? So that's who the Isis figure is. But what about Seth? What about Typhon? Who is he? So he has the same mother as Isis and Osiris, but as I said, his father is Cronus. He's the son of time. And so scholarship on the Seth Typhon identifies him with decay and death, but also with passion. According to Plutarch, Seth Typhon means oppressive and compulsive. Passion is a time force, decay and death force, in that it draws the soul into the underworld. In the guise of Seth, it makes the immortal soul forget himself, forget herself, forget that its immortal companion is Isis, and in a way makes it lose its kingship and its throne. So in the story of the Golden Ass, what are those things that compel people in all sorts of disorderly directions, destructive directions, painful directions? Well, actually, Apuleius names them for us. He calls it money and love, or sexual desire, if you like, but really it's money and sex are these compulsive forces. They all act like magical spells, but they go in the direction of disorder. So in the New Kingdom book of the Celestial Cow, I'm going to wrap this up. At first, there is no upper and lower world. It's all one eternal scene with the gods that later become gods of upper and lower, all in one place. And remember, when Lucius goes into his underworld journey, he says, I saw the sun at midnight, all the gods of the upper and lower, all in one place, face to face. So in the beginning, there's this, all the gods are in one place, but decay creeps in, as it does, and separates the realms. So Seth/Typhon is the force of entropy that pulls worlds apart into upper and lower and introduces disorder, dissolution, and death. In the context of the myth of Isis and Osiris, Typhon plays his role under the watchful eye of the goddess. Now Isis punishes him, she stops him, she binds him, but she lets him live. She refuses to consider him an enemy. I mean, they are born from the same mother. So Isis considers him a part of the process of transformation and transmutation. She acknowledges the role of both death and passion in the generation and regeneration of life. When Isis stands up for the unity of life and death in this way, she becomes the uniter of opposites. She becomes the unitary goddess of life eternal. But what is the unitary goddess if not the goddess of both life and death? Life expresses its eternal nature in the eternal renewal of life in the figure of Isis, in the ever regenerating sparkling new being. Egyptians were in love with this notion of newness. And then today for us, as we approach the spring equinox, we're all catching a glimpse of this sparkling renewal. As we endeavor to change the world around us for the better, we catch a glimpse of this sparkling renewal. We recreate, that is, create a new world. This creation out of rot, out of necessary rot, is the essence of the mother, the lover, the savior of the universe. That is Isis in the Golden Ass. How does this relate to Lucius? Well, he follows his compulsions to the point of crisis, and then his crisis brings him to a place where he seeks salvation. His compulsions doom him. They darken his fate. They draw him into underworld realities, then to the underworld itself, where he is initiated or transformed or transmuted by Isis. And at this point, he returns to himself. He remembers himself. Now, at this moment, just want to revisit that rider on the white horse and then open our discussion. Now, after he's initiated, Lucius gets his horse back. He's now in possession of his horse and in a position to really be a hero. Well, remember that while he is an ass, he witnessed a lot of crime and a lot of injustice. And when he begins to hear the voice of this sort of inner memory, he follows it. And what does he do? He becomes a lawyer. Then he becomes a priest for the state religion. So he becomes kind of this Osiris figure, civilizing force, who orders the world and brings about justice. You know, and think about that central symbol of, from the procession, the central symbol of the goddess comes in at the end, and it is an urn that has a handle on one end and a long spout on the other. So it's the central symbol of the mother of the universe, Apuleius is saying, is a vessel that receives, holds, and then it serves out. And here's where I think we hit that notion of heroism that Apuleius was hinting at the beginning. And then he dovetails it with his own life. He, in essence, tells us that he is the man he is, and he does the things that he does because he had, at some point, and continues to listen to her. He's listening to that feminine voice that speaks to him in his most intimate, private place, telling him what to do in his dreams. I think this is a good place to stop for me and open the discussion, please.
Thank you so much, Maryam. You've offered a cosmology of antiquity in your remarks. Very, very impressive. Thank you so much. Let's just jump right in with Dr. Szabo, who will kick off our comments and discussion.
Well, thank you, Jim. And thank you so much, Maryam. What a wonderful and rich presentation. You fitted so much in. It was fully packed. I have actually 3 questions from you, if I may. What do you think, how relevant and relatable the Golden Ass is to us now?
Oh, maybe you want to answer this yourself. You sure you want me to answer it?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, absolutely. Because the second question is so much related to it, that because you said that you read the book so many times, maybe 2-3 times, that what was the most important message to you from the book? Because we're all different, right? So that's why I'm just really, really interested that, in a sense, that why did you pick this book as a great book? And so what is it in it for you? And then how would you kind of not sell it to other people, but really say that why everybody should really read it?
Great question. You know, in addition to sort of having this sort of scholar's heart saying, well, and as I said at the beginning, what we have here is the only account of the Isis mysteries, which makes it the most detailed account of any of the mysteries. So that's one thing. We also have a real description and a very loving description of the one goddess, sort of the notion of the one goddess that we've become so interested in the 20th century. And we continue to be interested in it for many, many reasons. It's like this return to the goddess. And Apuleius gives us quite a wonderful description of this goddess. Remember, with her rising out of the sea and then all of her characteristics, which if you then link back into the Egyptian tradition, it just gets vaster and vaster and vaster. And I've only touched on it where I could. But the one thing, so you're asking me sort of, why is it relevant to us? Let's say we have no interest in the mysteries, and let's say we have no interest in the goddess. There's and we'll talk about this more when we talk about Eros and Psyche. There is a sense that this voice, that this guiding light within. So Isis is the guide of the immortal soul, and it sounds like it's so external and so religious and belongs to some tradition. But this notion that there is a guiding voice that recalls us back to who we really are, and in a sense, and what we aspire to. So this was clear to me, but it was only on this reading that I picked up this subtle notion of sort of the heroic quality of, yes, you listen to that voice, but that voice that is an inner voice. Therefore, you're not listening to an external voice. You're not doing what you're told. It's kind of that individuating, Jungian individuating thing. But it's so interesting the way that when Lucius actually hears his inner voice, what does he do? He serves. He actually wants to be a lawyer. And he serves as a priest of Apuleius. So, it's almost like the Jungian doesn't go far enough, because as you listen to that individual voice, you actually, how to, serve sort of the creation. There is this link with, you're serving the Isis, is serving the mother, but the more you connect with yourself, the more you sort of readily, you can bring this same order out into your surroundings. That's what's touching me right now.
Okay.
That's what's new for me.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I think the story itself is really, really brilliant. That the whole transformation from the human to the donkey, and it's almost like seeing reality, whatever we call it. It may be an individual, different translation. That it's a different story. Right. So that I think that's in it too, for me, especially. That's what I felt, that and also I kind of like went into this maybe too far-fetched idea that it's almost like Lucius may have experienced some kind of like near-death experience, because isn't it the case that so many times when people have maybe out of near-death experiences, they come back totally transformed, and that's when they really serve. That totally changed direction, and that's what he did, in a sense, in a way. So it is going to the underworld and going to kind of like a lower being. But anyway, I'm just going off the tangents. I just wanted to share this with you, that I don't know.
Oh, that's great. It's a great thought. This kind of the different sort of technologies of transformation that one of them is the near-death experience. And another is, of course, the use of entheogens. And this is one of the things that nobody ever mentions outright, but there are so many signs indicating that there were substances taken. But to your point, he's often suicidal.
Yeah, it doesn't like his reality, really. Probably. Or anyway, the last question, just as a comparison, or if there is anything at all, are there any similar publication or stories in Persian culture? Is this one the golden ass?
It's so funny that you asked me that because my father wrote a play called The Ass.
Really?
He did. So in terms of that, to use that motif to kind of say to make your little commentary on what human beings have become or what we do, that kind of thing. My own father actually wrote a play, but I can't think of anything that does that and also includes these elements of mythology and mystery. Why do you ask?
I don't know. I kind of like felt as you were talking that would there be any? Because I think that we know that through the morphogenic field that the information and wisdom and knowledge traveled across continents and oceans and everything. So was the Persian and the Egyptian culture very much connected in many ways in terms of mythology and culture and so forth? That's why I was asking that, is there any similar story in the Persian culture?
I can't think of the story, but what you just said, this connection between the Egyptian and the Persian, even the Iranian, is actually something that I'm beginning to perceive right now. Yeah, particularly the notion of there being an inner scale, sort of. With the Egyptian tradition, it's ma'at. In the Persian and Indian traditions, it's this sort of ratu, and it's related to this in that there is an inner knowing, there's an inner scale for the Egyptian tradition, that the heart is weighed. The heart is weighed against this feather that keeps it light. So there are definitely crossovers, and that's probably just the tip of the iceberg right there.
Yeah, that must be because these two kind of, I don't know, wisdom traditions, I would like to call it, really, they were just so profound in the way of knowing and sensing and feeling, the Persian and the Egyptians as well. So that I'm sure that must be some similar expressions of similar stories to explain cosmology and the cosmos and life. And anyway, thank you so much. I look forward to your...
I'm glad you're pointing that out. I hope to work on it with you in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Over to you, Jim.
Thank you, Georgie. And don't go away, Georgie. I have a question that I want to get your comment on too in a moment. But just to start with your last question, Georgie, if you think about when the Golden Ass was written, was that the second century AD?
Yes.
So that means starting with Cyrus the Great and the great Persian, Pax Persica, as they call it, and the interaction between all those areas of the world, that had been going on for at least 600-700 years. So my strong sense, Georgie, is that there was many parallels. I think the one fact that we need to always bear in mind is that we have available to us less than 5% of all the literature that was written back in those days, that was actually contained, much of it, in the library at Alexandria, which was, destroyed by the Christians and then finally by the Muslims. But it makes your mouth water just to think of, if we had even 50%, how much more rich that tradition, and if we had all the Persian documents and the Egyptian documents and the Greek documents and the Roman documents, Within that context, I think it's worth just noting your point, Maryam, that the only reason why this was saved, the golden ass, is because of its salaciousness. And so it was kept by the monks. So the very people that were burning the pagan books probably hid Apuleius under their pillow so they could
Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? Doesn't that actually kind of remind you of the creative and generative power of passion and why it shouldn't just be killed?
Totally. That were it not for the salaciousness of these celibate monks, we would have not heard about the golden ass either. And thereby, as you point out, have no extant text about those great goddess mysteries. And so the nuance of history and the subtlety of fate and circumstance is really amazing when you think about how slim these causative factors really were and continue to be in our time. But the question that I wanted to start with is to go back to your original contemplation. And that's why, Georgie, I wanted your comment too, because you're a deep scholar of these matters, around the question of the Great Mother. And was the Great Mother kind of the monotheistic container of it all? Or was the Great Mother one of the fractals of it all? When one goes back to the origin. And because you're both scholars and also feminists, I would just love to have both of you provide your own answer to the question that you posed, Maryam, because I think it's a fascinating area of inquiry. Maybe starting with you, Maryam, and then you, Georgie.
Okay, so I'm understanding your question this way, is the Great Mother, taking the word mother here, that the figure of the mother being one fractal of sort of the one being, correct? Is it a container or is it a fractal? I'm going to go with fractal. You know, for starters, yes, the mother is an incredible figure. It's an incredible image. We all know what it means. We all know the kind of love and nourishment and life-giving sort of aspects that it has. But what I find fascinating about Isis is that she is mother, but she is the greatest lover at the same time. So she is many, many, many things in addition to being a mother. And one of those things is that she is so romantically bound with Osiris. I'm not sure if this is how you're meaning it, if you're actually kind of focusing on the mothering aspect of the goddess or on the female aspect of,
No, I was asking more the question, you brought in a scholar, a feminist scholar at the beginning, I forget her name, who was very specifically saying that there's no evidence for this notion of the Great Mother as somehow a monotheistic pleroma or container of it all. And, that's a very live debate in feminist philosophy and feminist theology. One thinks of Riane Eisler's, the chalice and the blade, for example, and the tendency to see the Great Mother as the original prima materia out of which everything came. And since you brought in a counterpoint to it, I just wondered how you came down in that debate. And of course, Georgie, I'd love to hear how you come down in that discussion and debate.
Oh, okay. There's definitely no, without a shadow of a doubt, there is a unitary goddess in the mythological record, whether she's Mother Earth, Earth Mother, Mother of the universe, all of that Neolithic imagery. There's no shadow of a doubt. But as you're pointing out, you made a very good point that we have a lot of missing texts. You know, so at the very, very least, we shouldn't be so bold as to to presume that we know the way things have always been. You know, when things are carved into stone, it's a different. That's why the image speaks 1,000 words. So to me, no, the mythological record is full of the All Mother. What do you think? Yeah.
How would you come out, Georgie? And by the way, before Georgie answers, I want to encourage all of our students to raise your hand because we want to hear from you in the time that we have remaining on the call. But Georgie, how would you come out on this?
I totally agree with what Maryam said. Absolutely, to every single word. Yeah, to me too is the Great Mother is a fractal, and I think throughout history and culture, as much as we know, there are different names given to this amazing fractal. And just really segueing back to what you said, that it's only 5% that we can read about our history. I think there is so much more than that, because through hearsay, through generations, there's so much of these stories passed on from parents or grandparents to the next generation. And I think some of recently I was reading a research result on this specific topic, that some of these stories, they really relate to all the archaeological finds going back to hundreds and thousands of years. So I think that the way we all have this Great Mother feeling, rather than I try to get away from this knowing, the more the kind of like the feeling. I think that's what really speaks to me more than anything else. That's what I would say, Jim.
Yeah, and if you add the paucity of the actual text in relationship to the enormity of the collective memory that we all have, that's passed on generation to generation in the finest oral tradition. That's how humanity has been doing it from the beginning, and continues to do it, even though we don't value it the way we used to. You're right, we know a lot more than we think we do about these matters. So thank you both for that. I have a number of more questions, but let me go to James Olson. James, if you want to ask your question, I've turned your mic on.
Hi, James.
Hi, thank you. A beautiful book, and I really appreciate that you being here and going through it. I've just been reading the Kabbalion, and I was wondering if there's any sort of relationship with that in this book. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but
So I can't pull up in my mind right now the contents of the Kabbalion. Maybe you can help us with that. But it is a Hermetic piece of literature, and this period that we're talking about, Hellenistic period in Alexandria, it also saw the rise of this kind of Hermetic tradition, the Hermetic school. And again, it's important to notice where they were. You know, they're in Egypt. So a lot of what they're working with, a lot of the content that they're working with is this Egyptian content, which as I noted, is funereal content. Like, it's all about the soul and its immortality and its original purity and things of that nature. But also, as Georgi and Jim have been pointing out, there was such a confluence of ideas there at that time. So I don't want to be too quick and kind of only point to Egypt in that. because there is the Neoplatonic was there, the Gnostic was there, sort of the Persian, all of these. I mean, it was just such a beautiful period of a freedom of thought, it seems. So in terms of the Hermetic literature being rooted in kind of the same soil out of which Apuleius is telling the story, that I can testify to, but maybe you can kind of give us a beautiful nugget from the Kybalion, sort of that has to do with this, the soul and its purity and its transmutation.
Yeah, it's a lot about transmutation and really the laws of the universe. And then like Jim had mentioned about the mother figure, and I guess there's gender and everything. There's male and female, and there's that connection, there's that draw. But the all is what they say is everything, and then the universe is part of that. But yeah, that's a kind of I don't know, I guess it's just interesting. I've been really kind of digging a little deeper into that, and I can see how the myths and legends can come out of that. And it's kind of scientific in a way, the Kybalion, because it's like the laws of the universe. But I can really see that and feel that those parts in these stories and these myths as well. So it's fascinating to me.
Oh yeah, thank you so much for reminding us about that, sort of the way that Kybalion conceptualizes this.
Yeah, it's more of the
union.
scientific, the laws of the universe. Yeah, anyways, thank you so much.
Thank you, James. Thank you, James. As we draw the session to a close, Maryam, and again, Georgie, would love to have you comment as well. I want to bring up an issue that was most striking to me reading the book, which doesn't have anything to do with Isis. It has to do with the donkey.
Okay.
And what was striking me as someone who really believes that the entire universe is conscious, from the trees and the birds and the bees and the fishes and the plants and all of that, what was striking to me is I think that's how animals think about humans most of the time. Here Apuleius, or the protagonist, is stuck in this donkey's body. He knows he's intelligent, but he's intelligent, but he keeps being treated like a dumbass.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that all the donkeys get treated like donkeys are intelligent, empathetic, emotional beings, and they keep thinking, Jesus, man, why are these humans treating me like an ass?
Yeah, when I'm actually so much better than them most of the time.
Yeah, where the dogs and the cats and all these animals that we consider to be inferior to us for whatever sets of reasons are actually equally intelligent in their own kind of fractalized way. So I couldn't stop thinking about that as I kept reading how the poor donkey, was treated in such an inhumane and obnoxiously stupid manner. So I saw that as an indictment against the human devaluation of the animal kingdom. And I know that probably was far from Apuleius's mind, but from a modern point of view, I just couldn't help but feeling sorry for the donkey.
But I think he would agree with you about the indictment on humanity. Certainly, I mean, the story just gets more and more disgusting, and people just get worse and worse and worse as it goes.
Yes, and I'm sure you agree, Georgie. Any comment you want to make?
Well, I don't have any recollection of what is it to be like being a donkey or any other animal. What was that look on your face, Jim? No, I do not.
I remember.
Do you?
I feel like one most of the time.
I don't know. I think it's a fantastic story. I think it's really, really great. And yeah, I'm sure that probably so many times amazing animals, they look at humans that how stupid we are. So yeah, that's a very great point, Jim. Well done.
Your comment really actually just made me feel my animal body though.
Yeah.
You were just saying right now you don't remember being an animal, just made me kind of go, wait, I think I am.
No, not a donkey, not a donkey. Like if I think about maybe like a wolf or like an eagle or something, like not a donkey or somehow. I don't know.
I don't think you were.
Well, that's probably where we all started anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're more evolved, Georgie. That's why you ended up as a wolf and an eagle. The two of us have a ways to go. Well, Maryam, thank you so much for your time and your deep wisdom. I just want to acknowledge the erudition with which you make your presentation. You have a vast knowledge of the mysteries of antiquity, and it comes through. So every time you present, whether it's on Apuleius or previously on Aphrodite and other matters, I just want to acknowledge your mastery of your craft. And
My goodness. Thank you so much. I always feel like I put way too much on the plate.
That's okay. That's what a graduate school is all about. So thank you all. And thank you, everybody. We're out of time, so we'll meet again the second Tuesday of April, again at 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific time for the grand finale of Maryam Sayyad's discourse on the Golden Ass.
Read up on Eros and Psyche by then, or read the story at least.
Okay, be well, everyone. See you next month. Bye-bye.